voice memo. I am leaving the meeting with the base, the local base member. I'm gonna try and get out everything I can remember off the top of my head. His name is Patrick. He's about 5'10". He's a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. He is some kind of an engineer. He talked about fomenting a race war. He talked about derailing a train. He is a Nazi. He is a violent extremist.
Hey friends, welcome back to M.I.A.'s in-depth analyses, where I talk about politics and history. Today's topic is going to be a little bit darker than the previous two topics, because I would like to address extreme far-right groups in Canada, because they are on the rise. So today's episode is about Nazis in Canada.
Membership is limited to nationalists of European descent.
Boo! Now, a lot of the world have the impression that Canada is...
I'm terribly sorry for this.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
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 I'm sorry. I really feel sorry for the story.
not as extreme as the United States, or, oh, we're not like the United States. But unfortunately, we too have our fair share of fascist fuglies living among us. There has been an incredible growth in Canadian groups with far-right extremist views since 2015, with at least 300 having emerged since then. So if we think this is a United States problem, we really need to open our eyes. Since 2019, our government has been adding a lot of groups to our terrorist entity list. 2 were added in 2019, and 6 more were added in 2021. The first 2 were Blood and Honor, and their combat division called Combat 18, their militant group.
The neo-Nazi groups Blood and Honor and Combat 18 are now considered terrorist entities in this country. Abigail Beeman is looking into this for us. Abigail, what difference does it make when groups are added to the terror list?
Donna, it gives authorities more power to investigate and prosecute. It's not a crime to simply be on the list, but once a group is listed, there's a whole new set of applicable charges in the criminal code under terrorist activity.
Because the consequences are very significant. Financial assets are frozen. People are prohibited from dealing with or engaging with these entities and so forth.
The 2 neo-Nazi groups are Blood and Honor and Combat 18, which is the armed branch of the group. This is the website of the Canadian Blood and Honor group. Right-wing extremism expert Barbara Perry says it's hard to know just how many members they have in Canada, but it could be about 100 active in Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. And they have been responsible for violence, not only globally, but here at home.
Obviously, violence against targeted communities. There was one, it was almost like a campaign of violence against an Asian community at one point. But there's also a lot of violence within the group. So there has been some retaliatory violence where former members have been attacked as well. And they've also been involved in some of the retaliatory violence directed towards anti-racist and anti-fascist organizers as well. So they do have a fairly lengthy history in that respect.
And the other 6 that were added 2 years later are the Aryan Strike Force, the Atomwaffen Division, James Mason, the Proud Boys, the Base, and the 3 Percenters.
Being added today are 2 ideologically motivated violent extremist groups, the 3 Percenters and the Aryan Strike Force. The 3 Percenters are a decentralized entity within the broader anti-government militia movements in the United States. They have been linked to bomb plots targeting the U.S. federal government building and the Muslim community. For example, in November of 2015, a 3 Percenter was arrested and eventually convicted of shooting and wounding 5 men at a Black Lives Matter demonstration in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And in 2020, 2 of the group's leaders directed a plot to allegedly kidnap the governor of Michigan, involving the acquiring and detonating of explosives to divert police attention from the kidnapping. The second group, the Aryan Strike Force, is a white nationalist organization that supports using violence as a necessary tool to achieve its goals. Also being added to the list is an American neo-Nazi an individual by the name of James Mason, whose instructions on tactics and counseling of terrorist activities have been strongly influential in a number of the listed groups. His writings have served as the ideological grounding for the neo-Nazi groups such as the Atomwaffen Division, which was listed as a terrorist entity in Canada. Mr. Mason has also provided tactical direction on how to operate a terrorist group and has coached others on murder and genocide.
Okay, let's talk about neo-Nazi terrorist entities in Canada. The first one on the list we have is the Aryan Strike Force. Founded in the UK between 2006 and 2010, the ASF is a neo-Nazi group which aims to violently overthrow governments, start a race war, and eradicate ethnic minorities. They have the goal to protect women and children, and using violence as a necessary tool to achieve their aims. They are also associated with Blood and Honor and Combat 18, and a lot of these groups are actually associated with each other in one way or another. The more you read about one, the more you realize they have connections in other groups as well. So it's like all of these groups are in bed with each other. Hold on a moment. Fellas, is it homo to be in a neo-Nazi group? I'd think about that.
Two bros chilling in the hot tub, 5 feet apart because they're not gay.
Apparently, the Aryan Strike Force had planned a suicide bombing attack on counter-protesters in November of 2016 at a white supremacist rally in Pennsylvania. In July of 2020, the Aryan Strike Force leader got 20 years in prison for weapons and drug charges, so that's cool. Apparently, one of the reasons they got caught was because they met with an undercover FBI informant at Cracker Barrel for business, and 6 members got arrested and charged. They were officially designated as a terrorist entity in Canada on June 25th, 2021. The next one we have is the Atomwaffen Division, another neo-Nazi group listed as an entity in Canada. Founded in the United States in 2013, the Atomwaffen Division, meaning nuclear weapons in German, is an international neo-Nazi terror group. The group calls for action of violence against racial, religious, and ethnic groups, and informants, police, and bureaucrats to prompt the collapse of society. In July 2019, the co-leader of this group was banned from ever entering Canada. In Canada, the group is allegedly called the Northern Order, which includes members of the Canadian Armed Forces. Yay! They apparently celebrate the anniversary of the Quebec City mosque shooting, which is disgusting, and they do this by defacing Canadian mosques with Nazi propaganda. A neo-Nazi affiliated with the Royal Canadian Navy was discovered to be selling handguns, assault rifles, grenades, and RPGs from the Balkans to French neo-Nazis in Marseille. In May 2022, the RCMP laid terrorism charges against Seth Bertrand of Ontario over alleged links to the Northern Order, aka Atomwaffen. He was also charged with vandalizing a transgender center. So, in June of 2022, the RCMP raided houses in rural Quebec allegedly connected to this neo-Nazi group. They were officially listed as a terror group on February 3rd, 2021. The third terrorist entity that we have in the group here is not a group but a man by the name of James Mason. He's a lifelong American neo-Nazi born on July 25th, 1952. He basically writes instruction manuals for the Atomwaffen Division, so I'm going to lump him in with the Atomwaffen Division again. Once again, like I said before, they're all very close to each other, so it feels a little homo if I'm being honest. This fucker is also banned from ever entering Canada, so he writes little instruction books on how to be a nice little white terrorist. The fourth group we're going to talk about is Blood and Honor, also called B&H. So there's a grocery store called B&H near my house, and it's really fucking good. So grocery store is
Name out your fucking mouth!
Founded in the United Kingdom in 1987, and their combat branch, Combat 18, has carried out violent actions including murders and bombings. They were officially listed as a terrorist entity in Canada on June 21st, 2021.
CBC News has learned the identities of dozens of Canadian white supremacists, exposing emails, photos, and names of members. A warning, some of what you are about to see is disturbing. Natalie Clancy has this exclusive story.
These photographs were never meant to be seen by outsiders. Children saluting at a neo-Nazi rally in Missouri, secret gatherings in Europe, and the Hitler tattoos they hide from their employers. Hackers broke into neo-Nazi websites and briefly posted what they found online. Canada's Anti-Racism Education and Research Society alerted us to the hacked information.
We can now begin to piece together a more accurate picture in terms of the distribution of these types of racist groups across Canada.
Lowen says this exposure is a huge blow to groups like Blood and Honor and Volksfront, who secretly organize online across Canada. Amongst the hacked lists of worldwide members, we discovered 74 Canadian names, addresses, emails, and passwords. There are clusters in Calgary, Quebec City, Hamilton, and Toronto. And these are emails from 142 people joining Blood and Honor Canada's online forum. The group has become notorious in BC as 3 alleged members are accused of assaulting visible minorities. This attack was caught on tape by CBC News. These 2 suspects, Alistair Miller and Robertson DeShazel, show up in the hacked files and are accused of setting this Filipino man on fire, a crime applauded in secret online forums. Anti-racist groups hope this hack cripples online recruitment.
They're going to have to be even more careful in terms of who they trust, who they associate with. They'll have to look over their shoulders. The police will have access to this information.
As soon as somebody sees a flyer or a poster with white pride on it, they're going to call the police.
Bill Noble was convicted of promoting hate online in BC 3 years ago and is furious. Thousands of emails about his white supremacist strategy, legal woes, infidelity, and even online dating were exposed. But the attack hasn't tempered his extreme views.
If it can be determined that any of these individuals carried out these acts because they were fully aware that they were interfering with the survival of an endangered race, then they should indeed be exterminated.
The 5th terrorist entity is Combat 18, the armed branch of Blood and Honor. In January of 2012, 4 Blood and Honor members were convicted of the 1998 murder of 2 homeless men because the group considered them to be inferior. The 6th group we're going to talk about is the Proud Boys.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by, stand by, stand by, stand by, stand by.
We all know them from their little stint on the Capitol. They're a neo-fascist organization formed in 2016 by Gavin McInnes, who actually is the co-founder of Vice. Womp womp. The Proud Boys espouse misogynistic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, and white supremacist ideologies. Do they not think of anything new? It's really getting old. Like, it's the same thing again and again and again. I swear I've been hearing the same thing since 1933. This group regularly attends Black Lives Matter protests and likes to make everyone's life a little bit more shitty. The Proud Boys were officially designated as a terrorist organization in Canada on February 3rd, 2021. After the Proud Boys were listed as a terrorist entity in Canada, they officially disbanded their Canadian group in May of 2021, but really they just rebranded themselves into a group called Canada First, and it is based in Hamilton, Ontario. Canada First is unapologetically fascist and dedicated to producing neo-Nazi propaganda and connecting like-minded National Socialists. I just want to say, if you ever hear national and socialism put together, run for your life. The Canada First group is overtly neo-Nazis in their ideology, and they call for the violent removal of Jews, feminists, anyone part of the LGBTQIA community, Black people, Muslims, and anyone who isn't part of their white race. The 7th group we're going to talk about is the Base, a neo-Nazi organization founded in 2018. Again, this group is calling for societal collapse, to incite a race war in the form of violence, create chaos, yada 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 yada. They also specifically recruit people with military experience so they can leverage their training. Allegedly, Master Corporal Patrick Matthews, age 26, a trained explosives expert in the Canadian Armed Forces, was a member of the Base.
Patrick Matthews, 9-year military reservist, combat engineer, committed neo-Nazi.
In August 2019, he was outed by the Winnipeg Free Press as a Nazi, and he escaped to the American border 2 days later. He was arrested in Maryland by the FBI in January of 2020.
An update on the case of one of the men arrested and linked to a violent white supremacist group transporting and harboring Patrick Matthews.
He was arrested along with 2 other alleged members of an aggressive neo-Nazi group called the Base.
This corporal from the Canadian Armed Forces instructed others.
If you want the white race to survive, you're going to have to do your part. Derail some trains, kill some people, and poison some water supplies. You better be ready to do those things. If not, then you're not going to be ready for what's coming.
The Base were also listed as a terrorist entity on February 3rd. 2021. The eighth group we're going to talk about is the 3%ers, also known for their role in the U.S. Capitol riots. The name 3%ers actually refers to the mistaken belief that only 3% of Americans took arms against the British during the 1776 Revolution, which simply isn't true, but they claim to be the 3% that are going to save America, basically. The 3%ers have been linked to bomb plots targeting U.S. federal buildings and Muslim communities. Very original, guys. Why do all of their names sound like something that you would make up when you were 12? Or something from a Call of Duty game? Anyway, cringy. According to a report published in June 2022 by Jim Carr of the House of Commons in Canada, titled The Rise of Ideologically Motivated Violent Extremism in Canada, he outlined the rise in hate against the Jewish community, the Islamic community, women's rights, and against the LGBTQ community as well. According to our Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a breeding ground for this form of violent extremism. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, ideologically motivated violent extremism activity has been fueled by an increase in extreme anti-authority and anti-government sentiments, often rooted in the weaponization of conspiracy theories. In 2019, the most recent year for which Statistics Canada data was available, Jews were the most targeted religious group for hate-motivated crimes, for police-reported hate crimes. On average in Canada, an anti-Semitic attack occurs every single day, 365 days a year. The Jewish population in Canada only makes up 1% of our population. However, 16% of all reported hate crimes are against the Jewish community. There has been a 100% increase in anti-Semitic attacks and rhetoric since 2017.
The Jewish organization lists a record number of anti-Semitic incidents in 2021, 2,799 compared to 2,610 last year. Online hate accounted for most of that, but violent incidents rose from 9 to 75 in 1 year, many of them in that month of May.
We saw that violence start to emanate in a way our community, a generation of Jews in this country, has never witnessed before.
Statistics Canada compiles its own data on hate crimes based on police reports. B'nai B'rith uses those numbers too, but it also includes incidents of harassment, vandalism, and violence reported directly to it. In cases where there's video evidence, individuals carrying out the acts can be clearly identified, or there were documented arrests. B'nai B'rith cautions, however, that its numbers might be an undercount because Montreal and Toronto police did not provide data. The report details incidents including this one, where a Toronto man was attacked allegedly for being Jewish, harassment experienced by a sitting MP.
I personally witnessed the car that is referred to in the B'nai B'rith report that drove up and down Kildare Road in my riding in Mount Royal in the city of Côte St. Luc, screaming insults, epithets, and kill the Jews, kill the Jews.
2 men were later arrested. The federal government held a national summit on anti-Semitism last July. B'nai B'rith called it a step in the right direction, but wants a national action plan. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
That also brings us to how Muslims are treated in Canada.
Every cult, no matter how twisted, has its pantheon.
Prayers were just wrapping up when someone burst in and opened fire.
In the base, no one was revered more than gunmen who massacred.
On January 29th, 2017, in Quebec City, a rogue gunman walked into the Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec City just before 8 p.m. and murdered 6 worshippers and injured many others.
One by one, the victims were named, a solemn tribute for a shooting that tore through this peaceful prayer room 6 years ago. It's the first time the community has gathered on the anniversary in the very room where a gunman opened fire, killing 6 men and injuring 19 others. Earlier in the day, the mosque opened its doors, first for prayers and then to others in the community to learn about Islam. For Mohamed Labidi, it's an opportunity to demystify his religion.
I was very happy that some of our neighbors came.
But even 6 years later, he says the memories still hurt as vividly as that terrifying night.
We never forget what happened it will be hard for us as community, for the member of the family.
Canada is a place of openness and respect.
Since the shooting, the federal government has taken steps to deal with Islamophobia in this country. January 29th is now considered the National Day of Remembrance of the Quebec City mosque attack and action against Islamophobia. It also just named Canada's first representative to combat Islamophobia. Not present was Quebec Premier François Legault, who was called out by the former mosque president. The deputy premier was sent in his stead.
Mais j'aimerais bien qu'un jour
Amin Delbali was shot 7 times and is now paralyzed from the chest down.
He opened fire for 2 minutes with a 9mm Glock pistol. He took 6 lives that day and shows no remorse. In the month before the shooting, he obsessively visited the Twitter accounts of far-right media personalities like Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson, also Laura Ingraham, David Duke, Mike Cernovich, Richard B. Spencer, and Kellyanne Conway. When he learned from television that Canada would begin accepting more immigrants, he decided to proceed with his long-planned shooting of eradicating Islamic culture from Canadian identity. The 6 murder victims were Ibrahima Berry, aged 39, a Quebec government IT worker, Mamadou Tanou Berry, aged 42, accounting technician, Khaled Balkasemi, aged 60, professor at Laval University, Abu Bakr Tabti, aged 44, pharmaceutical technician, Abdelkrim Hassan, aged 41, Quebec government computer analyst, and Azadine Soufiane, aged 57, grocery store owner. Eyewitnesses and video surveillance show that Soufiane was fatally shot after rushing and grappling with the shooter, saving several lives.
I miss Azadine for this larger-than-life personality, this ability to be so altruistic and to think about others before thinking of himself.
And he was posthumously awarded the Star of Courage. The 2017 shooting at the mosque in Quebec City remains the worst attack on a house of worship in Canada in history. In December 2022, international Muslim organization mosque caretaker Mohammed Aslam Zafis, aged 58, had his throat slit outside of the Rexdale area mosque in Ontario.
Community members here say the death of Aslam Zafis is one of several attacks on the Muslim community, leading many to wonder what's causing the rise in Islamophobia. It's alleged Zafis's killer had ties to neo-Nazi groups, which experts say have grown over recent years due to an explosion in online hate.
The far right in Canada, the racist right in Canada, at its very core, its kind of core DNA, is anti-Muslim racism.
Anti-Muslim hate is also creeping into the election campaign trail. The Conservatives dropping their candidate in the Toronto riding Beaches East York for allegedly making a number of Islamophobic tweets. Instances like this have driven the Ahmadiyya Muslim Youth Association to travel coast to coast, encouraging Canadians to ask them anything about their faith.
If we don't share, interact, and engage with people, then there's no way for them to actually learn about what Islam teaches.
It's an initiative with the intent of support and unity, similar to the way Zafis lived his life.
In June of 2021, 4 people were murdered in a vicious London car attack. The Afzal family were struck by a pickup truck while taking a leisurely family walk. Salman Afzal, aged 46, Talat Afzal, aged 74, Madiha Afzal, 44, and Yumna Afzal, aged 15, were all killed. The only survivor of the attack was Fayez Afzal, aged 9, just having lost his father, mother, sister, and grandmother in an act of violent hatred.
We believe that this was an intentional act and that the victims of this horrific incident were targeted. We believe the victims were targeted because of their Islamic faith.
A 9-year-old boy, the only survivor, in hospital tonight. I want to bring in Dr. Munir El-Qasim. He's the Imam of the Islamic Center of Southwestern Ontario. He joins me now from London, Ontario. What can you tell me about who they were and how they're being remembered?
Unfortunately, someone decided last night that only a 9-year-old boy will stay alive. I spoke with the uncle of the mother, who is, devastated, obviously, by what happened. The first thing that he said, please send the message that members of the community will not react in an angry fashion, and that we will show, love. We will rise above retribution. We will not engage in back and forth manifestation of anger. So this is something that really assured me that together we will be able to handle the situation that is extremely tragic.
To boot, there's also a underreporting of hate crimes in Canada because different provinces have varying definitions of what constitutes a hate crime, so it's very nuanced. There's also lack of significant training to combat the rise in online hate as well. Now, another problem with the rise in far-right hate groups also comes because of the shifting demographic of far-right members. While youth have always been attracted to far-right causes because they're easily impressionable and they're always online, so it's easy to find victims.
Well, I'm 17 right now. I'm currently in high school. Once I'm 18, I'm going to try to get a gun.
The movement now sees more middle-aged professionals joining the cause. The mob that attacked the United States Capitol included a significant number of accountants, doctors, and lawyers. There's also a real sense that people can actually get away with this stuff in Canada because of its legitimacy through people like President Trump.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
There's a radicalization in the military and in the police in Canada, so I think there's a sense from these groups that they're not going to face any consequences for their actions because why would they when they have members inside the force?
Those with actual military experience are particularly prized.
I'm currently in the military, but I'm in the National Guard.
A new report released today by the National Security and Intelligence Agency found white supremacy poses an active threat to and within the Canadian military. The review also concluded the Canadian Forces National Counterintelligence Unit's ability to monitor the threat is limited. Eric Sorensen looked into the findings and the recommendations. Eric.
Donna, the review focused on the Canadian Forces National Counterintelligence Unit and its domestic efforts to identify insider threats. It found there has been inadequate integration with other security teams in the Defense Department and that the unit has not been up to the task of countering extremism in spite of multiple reviews. The Counterintelligence Unit has been the subject of 10 internal studies in the last quarter century. All found the unit suffered from resource and policy limitations, resulting in an inability to fully meet its mandate. This review does not significantly depart from these previous assessments. Former Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan undertook a review that found the military has not done enough to identify and prevent extremism. White supremacy scandalized the Canadian military almost 30 years ago when the Canadian Airborne Regiment was disbanded after some members beat a Somali teenager to death. More recently, a former engineer in the Canadian Army Reserve, Patrick Matthews, was sentenced to 9 years in prison in the U.S. for his role in a plot to attack a pro-gun rally in Virginia, allegedly to instigate a race war. The National Security and Intelligence Review Agency says in its report that white supremacist groups seek out individuals with prior military training and encourages others to enlist in the military to gain access to military tactics and equipment. While the agency found that white supremacy poses an active counterintelligence threat, this government, like previous governments, has not said how it will fix the problem.
A lot of violent extremist groups in Canada are made up of former or current members of the Canadian Forces, individuals with real combat training and real capabilities who have gotten increasingly radicalized, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. These right-wing extremist groups somehow think that they're all manly, so there's a masculinity-affirming culture that values not just freedom of expression, but also the taking up of arms. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thanks for sticking around for another video with little old me. Be kind to everybody. Tip your waitress, tip your bartender, kiss your cat, kiss your dog, go for a walk because it's really nice outside, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video. I'll be posting every Tuesday, Canadian politics, Canadian history, anything I find interesting, and I'll see you in the next one.